Hello and welcome to another episode of Free Spirits. And once again, my guest is Brendan Chilton, who I first got to know when he was running Labour Leave, although you're doing lots of other things now, Brendan, aren't you?
I am indeed. We met about, nearly a decade ago, Andrew, at Labour Party conference. So, gosh, right. And haven't we done well in how we look since then? I'm running a group now called the Independent Business Network, which is setting itself up to be an alternative to the established business voices in the UK, because we feel on most of the big issues, they've been wrong. Go all the way back to the gold standard, our relationship with Germany, the IMF in the 70s, our joining the European Union, our leaving the European Union. They've called everything wrong, and business is not represented by these groups. So that's what we're trying to do, set up an alternative.
That's very good. Is it going well?
We've got just under 2,000 members at the moment that have signed up.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we've got more directly paying members than what CBI have got. They don't have directly affiliated businesses. They have business associations. So we're growing rapidly, and there's a lot of support out there for a radical business group that's proposing some pretty interesting ideas that are actually compatible with social democracy. Before your listeners go, oh, hang on, he's a Labour guy talking about free markets, but they're very compatible, actually. So it'll be an exciting few years, hopefully, if we can get it running really, really well.
No, that's very, very good. It's been a strange old week this week. I mean, Captain Sir Tom Moore sadly died, and wasn't that man the best of British? I mean, he was the embodiment of the British spirit, and what a great guy he is. And sadly, a couple of people who I know, they've also lost parents this week. So it's been a bit of a sad week. But you know, Captain Sir Tom, what a year he just had. You know, he was almost 100 and no one had heard of him. In fact, he'd been a contestant on Blankety Blank back in 1983, apparently. I saw a little video clip of it. But no one really knew who he was. And then by the time he died a couple of days ago, he was known throughout the world.
Well, it is quite amazing when you think about it. And I bet a year ago when he was sitting there, you know, in his home with his cocoa or whatever he was doing on a Sunday afternoon, he couldn't imagine the year that he would have, from Barbados to the 33 million he raised for the NHS, the honours and awards he got, meeting the Queen, knighthoods, making the captain, but all completely well deserved. And it just shows you, actually, I think, that out there in the country, there are ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And this is just one example of one individual who we've all got to know. But there are hundreds of thousands of exceptional doctors and nurses. There are hundreds of thousands of exceptional teachers, parents, people volunteering, you know, doing simple things from delivering food to people that are shielding. And I know a few years ago, Cameron spoke about creating the big society. Well, the truth is it's always been there, and we just haven't always noticed it. And hopefully, one thing that will come from this year is that we do appreciate more those people that do things for nothing for other people. And I'm fully behind the idea that we should name a hospital after him and things like this, because I think that would be a fantastic tribute for what he's done, particularly for the NHS.
Yeah, no, very, very much so. I mean, he was out in Burma. I was reading his obituary in the Telegraph, and he was out in Burma during the Second World War, and he was actually, because he was such a good motorcyclist, he was a motorcycle dispatch rider trainer. That's what he was doing, you know, so he was a hero in the Second World War. He served his country, and it's amazing. You're never too old to serve your country, are you? You can be approaching 100 years old, and you can still be there to serve your country. And I just, he's one of those people. I think all of us thought we knew him, even though we didn't. It was a sort of, it would have been great to have met him. I would have loved to have met him. And watching that Piers Morgan life stories that he did, I don't know if you saw that
Yes.
a couple of months ago. I mean, even Piers Morgan looked genuinely in awe of him. You know, he was genuinely respected him, and that's Piers Morgan. You don't often get that from him. But yeah, I just felt that we knew him. The country seems to sort of feel like that.
I think the other thing is he's of that generation that there were, you know, when I was a child, there were quite a few of them around, but now there are very few people around that actually fought in the Second World War. We're starting to come to the end of having people around now who fought in that war. And I think there is a sort of national affection naturally for anyone that's fought. But that conflict in particular has got such a strong emotional, political and social resonance with everybody. He was sort of, our last great veteran in some respect. There was that kind of element to it as well. Here's a man who, fought the Japanese Empire in Burma and in the Pacific, has come back, worked all his life, and is still, at the end of his life, working for the country. And as I say, as we're losing that generation now, I think this was sort of the nation grasping on to that memory of that period. I think there was an element of that to it.
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, when I was a child, very young child, sort of in the 70s, really. I mean, I do remember the people who were I was going to say selling poppies. Technically, they don't sell them, do they? But you know what I mean. There were veterans from the First World War. There were men in their 80s, who had fought in the First World War, and obviously they eventually went. And you're right, we're now just coming to the end of that generation who fought in the Second World War. And I think, yes, that's very much what people think. What a great generation! What a fantastic generation they were. They laid everything. They laid down their lives and saw unspeakable things. Many of them couldn't even speak about it. I mean, a friend's father, he fought in Japan against the Japanese, and he'd seen some of the camps that they had there with people starving and unspeakable things. They couldn't really speak about them. I know my father, when he did his national service in the sort of 53, I think it was 54, he went out to Germany for a year, and he visited Belsen. And he said there was a story going around that the birds wouldn't even land there, and he said it was true. The birds would be flying around, but none of them would ever land on the ground. And he said there was still a stench about it. And this was many years after the end of the Second World War. It's a generation. It really is that sort of generation. Heroes to me. And I think Captain Sir Tom is certainly very much a hero for many different reasons.
Definitely.
Right. Let's move on to lockdowns, and I particularly want to look at schools. Because when you're homeschooling a 4.5-year-old, it ain't easy, I can tell you.
Where is he, Andrew? Shouldn't he be running around, getting in the way of the camera right now?
Well, I said that because his behaviour at school hasn't been brilliant, shall we say?
Right.
They have allowed him in on a Monday and a Thursday, so at least he's there. But other 3 days a week, we do have to homeschool him, and I really feel sorry for people. I mean, there's people who are trying to homeschool 3 kids at 3 different ages. Some can work independently, others can't. And of course, parents are not equipped to do this. And then you get, teachers have a lunch break, don't they? But when you're homeschooling, you don't have a lunch break because you're going to make lunch for your kids. Yeah. And then when they finish school, well, you've still got them, haven't you?
Well, exactly. You're totally right. And one of the things that has emerged throughout this lockdown, but I don't think it's got anywhere near the attention that it ought to have, is the enormous inequality that exists within the homeschooling arena, if you like. People that have got large houses with nice, comfortable rooms where their children have all got their own bedroom and a little desk in their bedroom or even a study, homeschooling isn't too bad. It's annoying, it's frustrating, it's difficult, but it's not too bad. When you are a family cramped into a flat and your children are in bunk beds in the bedrooms, and maybe you've got a young one sleeping on a bed in your room as well, you've got a small living space, trying to home educate 3 children is not easy. And the ward I represent, as some of your listeners will know, and as you know, Andrew, I'm a Labour councillor in Kent. My ward is full of those sorts of people in those sorts of properties, cramped tenement rows, apartment blocks, very little outside space where people can go and exercise and play, and it really isn't easy. And the internet issue as well, having access to laptops and computers and IT. There's an enormous problem there. When Boris made that sudden announcement at the beginning of this year, I think schools opened for one day and then they were shut the day after. And he announced that people are home educating. I can tell you they weren't, because the schools had prepared for people going back. Parents have the resources. The school where I'm a governor, we were all roped into delivering home learning packs, and we all went around delivering them just to try and tide people over for the week. And I really do worry that, I'm sure you do too, this year, and the past year as well, we've potentially got a generation of sort of semi-delinquents because they haven't been in school, they haven't had that professional environment in which to learn. And I really do worry that when school does resume, they're going to be so behind, and it's going to obviously have a knock-on effect right the way through to when they go get a job.
Yes, you're completely right there. I mean, my son's school, they didn't return on the Monday. That was going to be a teacher's training day, or was a teacher's training day. So he didn't go back that one day, thank goodness. Because I think going back one day and then going off again was just ridiculous, really. I mean, but anyway, that's another thing. But I have to say that we got an email from his school first thing on the Tuesday morning, asked us to log on Microsoft Teams at 11 a.m. They had some work set for him, although they said we're not trying to do a really structured day-to-day, you know, maybe just try to engage them, and we'll get started the following day, which we did, and regular work is coming through. We watch different videos and things like that with them to do with phonics and maths and, you know, different things like that. We sort of take photographs of what he's doing, of his work, or sometimes we video him as well and send the videos in so the teachers can see what he's up to. And the support they're giving is absolutely fantastic. I mean, please bear in mind that these are teachers who are actually in the classroom teaching, smaller numbers, of course, but they're still teaching in the classroom. And they're having to also look at all the work that's coming in online and deal with parents and offer them support. And, you know, parents are saying, well, I'm just really struggling here. Can you help me do this or do that? And they're doing that. And teachers are easily working 12-hour days, probably more than that.
Easily.
Yeah, I mean, I can't fault my son's school in any shape or form, or any of the teachers. They have been absolutely fantastic.
I totally agree. And when my criticism of the system is not necessarily criticism of the teachers, it's where they had such very little time to prepare for the announcement, particularly in that first week. I do think, though, that I don't know what your view on this is, and I'd be quite interested. I do think we need to get our schools and our teachers back now. We really do. Yeah. And as you know, Andrew, I take a very sort of, some might say, extreme. I think it's a practical approach to this lockdown, that, you know, we cannot continue borrowing at the rate at which we are, you know, nationalising the whole economy, and at the same time hoping that we're going to save jobs and businesses, because the furlough scheme, for example, is an income. It's providing no core support costs for businesses. We're basically keeping people employed in jobs that in many cases no longer exist.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a very expensive unemployment benefit. That's what it is at the moment.
Well, it is. I mean, if you look at hospitality in my neck of the woods, I don't know it's like what it's been like for you in Kent. I've sort of lost track of what all these different tiered restrictions.
Kent's a sort of pariah.
Yeah, well, you were tier 4 at one point, weren't you? Yeah. I mean, hospitality in my neck of the woods closed their doors on the evening of the 4th of November, and they have never reopened. I know some parts of the country they reopened a little bit in December, and then they were closed down again. But they've never. So they've been closed now. What we did with the 4th of February. So they've been closed now for exactly 3 months, and there's no chance of them opening probably for about another 3 months. That is 6 months. Now, I took my wife out to lunch at a lovely French restaurant in Beverley on the 4th of November, and the waiter didn't think they would ever reopen, because it just costs so much money to keep these businesses going. Yes, they can sort of put the staff on furlough and then get the money back, but they've got to have the money to put out before they can get it back again. And the owner of that particular restaurant owns a total of 4, and he just doesn't have the money anymore. So how many businesses are going to be like that? They're just not going to reopen.
Well, quite. And it's also the nighttime economy. High streets in general were in trouble across the country before this lockdown. All this has done is accelerate it. and family-owned and family-run firms are suffering the most, because most of the big firms can absorb this hit. They've got reserves, they've got assets. If you're a small family firm, you don't have those huge reserves and those huge assets which you can borrow against and back yourself up. And so, I mean, the next issue, I think, in British politics is going to be how we deal with the unemployment and the recovery, particularly youth unemployment. That's extremely high at the moment. And we all remember a few years ago in Spain what happened when they had the huge levels of youth unemployment. You saw political extremes, not just in Spain, of course, but Italy, Greece, Italy, Portugal, the whole of the south of Europe. You saw the rise of political extremes, and we are going to go through a very difficult period. And politically, that could have quite serious ramifications for both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. Yes, it will, because at the moment we just borrowing money, and a lot of it's coming from China as well. I mean, let's not forget that. But our friends in Beijing. Yes, our friends in Beijing, indeed. So it's all borrowed cash. We're at the highest levels of taxation that we've ever had. I don't know how much higher the Chancellor thinks that they can go, but we are expecting some form of tax rises. We may agree or disagree on what the solution would be. I would say we have just got to slash taxes and we've just got to go for it. I agree. That's my Andrew. Oh, you're right. Well, that's good. The worst thing we've got to do. It's supply side reform. We've got to do that, and we've got to get all these free ports sorted as well. And we've got to use the Brexit opportunities that we do have now to really put a rocket up the derrière of the economy. If I may phrase it, I was going to say a word beginning with A there, but I kept it clean. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I know there are varying reports in the newspapers that one week the Chancellor's considering increasing taxes, the next week you read that cabinet ministers are discouraging that. The Labour Party this week, last week rather, Sir Keir Starmer said increasing council tax would be a death blow right now to family incomes. So I do think a consensus is gradually emerging, at least that taxes should not go up at this stage. I think we've got a bit more work to do to get government to cut taxes. But I think there are all sorts of things one could do for the hospitality sector in our high streets the next year. I mean, the Chancellor, for example, last year abolished business rates. Well, why can't he do it again this year? They're an unfair system. Why can't we ensure that any investments that hospitality make are exempt from VAT? Why can't we freeze town centre parking? All sorts of things. To encourage people to, once the lockdown is lifted, to encourage people to get back into the town and start spending their money. Because otherwise we're going to have wastelands in our town centres. And, you know, that will do nothing for the vibrancy of local economies and local communities. Yeah, we have to decide what we're going to do with town centres, because as you rightly said, the high street businesses have been in trouble for a very long time. And I think there's a huge different mixture of reasons, really. I mean, it's not just the fact that you can get everything off Amazon, but it's also you've got to drive into town centres or go for park and ride. You got to pay for parking. There's all sorts of reasons, and I think that town centres are going to become much more sort of hospitality focused, including having cinemas there maybe and different other entertainment venues. And getting more people to live there, so turning a lot of that retail space now into residential accommodation. And I think that is going to happen. I think it was always going to happen, but yes, these lockdowns have accelerated that process. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, our cities will look very different. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not trekking into London anymore for a 1 hour meeting in the day. This is what I'm using from now on, partly because I object to paying £80 for a train ticket. Where I am, it's £80 to get into London. High speed one, Andrew. If you get in before 10 o'clock, it's £82. Or at least it was a year ago. It's probably much more expensive now because all the trains are going bust. So yeah, probably 182 by the time we get out of this. But I mean, I know that the Freedom Association is concerned with what it says on the tin, freedom. And my big worry now is, although the lockdown might end, the government have left it open for the possibility of a return to lockdowns and tiers, because Boris said just a few weeks ago, and this is him verbatim, "We cannot begin to lift until we are sure there are no new variants." Well, the nature of a virus is that there will always be new variants. As we all know, we all get a cold once or twice a year because the cold mutates. Same with the flu. And so if we're now being told that whenever there's a new variant, the inverse of that is, whenever there's a new variant or a new strain, tiers may have to be introduced. Local or national or regional lockdowns will have to be introduced. And this is not sustainable. It will, I mean, I dread to think what some of those communities, particularly in the Midlands and Northeast, are looking like now, where they were struggling anyway. And all this has done is killed them. I speak to MPs from those areas all the time who are very worried, particularly about employment. And so the government do need an alternative strategy here, because although the obviously as fewer people are interacting, the virus is spreading less. What is also happening is people are spending less, business is suffering, market confidence is suffering, and debt is going through the roof. And while we're dealing with the public health issue, we're not dealing with the economic health of the nation, which has got far more reaching and much longer consequences for what we're doing right now, and we'll be paying for this for decades to come.
We did a webinar in December. It was Lockdowns, the Case Against. We had Philip Davies, Esther McVeigh. We were supposed to have Sammy Wilson, but there was something cropped up with Northern Ireland. He had to go and have a meeting with the Northern Ireland Secretary.
Lots cropping up over there.
Exactly, yeah. I can't remember exactly. So much has gone on since then. Like, I can't remember exactly what cropped up. but something did. And Philip, I think, made a very good point that people in Public Health England are not losing their jobs. They're on a full pay, no problem at all. Matt Hancock, he still draws his salary every month, but they're expecting everybody else to give up their jobs, and that's simply not right. And on the strictly sort of freedom related issue, I was listening to the radio this morning. One of these adverts came on, and with a sinister voice saying, "Can you look someone in the eye and say that you wear your face mask properly? If you allow a tradesman into your house to do some essential work, do you always open the window?" And I just think, well, for me, it's water off a duck's back, but for some people, it is just terrifying them again. We've already had a terrified nation. We should be having a government campaign to get people back to normal, to unterrify them, if there's such a word.
Right.
But that's all that these adverts are doing, and I think it's very sinister. It is very Orwellian.
It is indeed, and as I said, with the possibility of this continuing on and off for some time, and the talk of, we're going to need an annual vaccination or a biannual vaccination, this is going to go on. And let's just not forget, in World War II, measures were obviously introduced because of the Nazi threat. Some of those controls were not lifted until the 70s. Price controls, I think, didn't go out until the mid-70s under Heath and Wilson. And so all these powers and measures the government have accumulated over the past year, we're now, and your organisation in particular, is going to have a massive role to play in making sure that they're handed back to the people. Because as Tony Benn once said, the government should, when you're elected to Parliament, you're given by the people powers and responsibilities, and it's your job to hand them back intact at the next election. Well, at the moment, that's not the case. The MPs have granted the government extraordinary powers, and they need to take them back and give them to us at the earliest opportunity. That's what I.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sorry just to interject there, but you're absolutely right. And I've given up fighting lockdowns and tiered restrictions and things like that, because it's just clearly we're not winning the argument. You couldn't get enough parliamentarians on side. Well, I mean, you struggle to get 10% of parliamentarians on side. Poll after poll suggested that the public were in favour of them or are in favour of them. So we're very much looking to March. Now, we should be in a much better position in March. I mean, already over 10 million people have been vaccinated. What reasons from April onwards will the government come up with to keep all the powers that it's got now? And it's going to have a very weak argument. And Chris Green, who's the Conservative MP for Bolton West, is one of our members. He wrote a piece for us in our monthly newsletter that goes out to members. And he's very much making that sort of point. We need to look to the future, and it's not that far ahead, a few weeks' time, see where we are, and then start getting these powers out. Let's scrap the Coronavirus Act. If the government does need some other emergency powers, there are other pieces of legislation you can actually get those powers from. But the Coronavirus Act should be scrapped. That should go. And we need to move to the future, because we cannot keep closing the economy down. We cannot keep restricting people's freedom just because some people get ill. And I mean, I was talking to my vicar on the phone earlier this morning, and she said to me that all the funerals that she's done are people who are basically in their 80s, 90s, 100 who've died of COVID. No one particularly young who's died of COVID. And obviously all these people are now getting vaccinated. My mother thankfully got vaccinated. She's 79. She got her vaccine a couple of weeks ago, very relieved. But they're now saying, well, we're not going to really restore our freedoms until everyone over 50 gets vaccinated. Well, I'm 50 at the beginning of March, so I guess I'm going to be in that in that category. And I'm thinking, well, when am I going to get vaccinated? April, maybe? May?
Maybe. I think people have been looking up their when they're due to get vaccinated. I mean, some of them are not due till next year, and of course the 50 to 70 age range in the UK is one of the largest age demographics. So whether that will get done, certainly, you know, I mean, over the summer people are going to be lounging in their gardens in the sunshine as we move into spring. I think it's going to take a lot longer than we anticipate, but it's also the coercive nature of some of the statements that are coming outside of government now, and also from business as well. We will not employ you unless you've had the vaccine. Now, I'm going to have the vaccine when I'm allowed to. I mean, as I said, I'm probably not getting it till this time next year or something like that. But I don't like this. You know, we're not going to employ you unless you've been jabbed up. You can't travel unless you've had the vaccine. Now, they're not saying we're not going to you're not allowed to travel. Sorry, that we're going to refuse you travel, but we're not going to let you if you don't do blah blah. Now that's wrong. That is coercive, and it's the sort of thing that government really ought to be railing against. But unfortunately, some are encouraging it with their statements, which I think it's not the sort of country we are.
No, I agree with you. Although I did hear Charlie Mullins from Pimlico Plumbers say in an interview, he said, well, put it this way, if you were a member of the public, say you were elderly and you needed a plumber to come around, one of my plumbers came around, would you want the plumber to be vaccinated, or would you want him not to be vaccinated? And I thought to myself, well, I know what the answer would be, and I would probably want him to be vaccinated, yes. But in all fairness to him, he is not threatening this on existing employees. He's only saying, if you're going to be hired by me, you'll have to be vaccinated. But it's a very difficult subject, because I agree we should not have mandatory vaccination. We've never done that. It actually undermines the faith in the system. But then people are so frightened that they probably do want someone visiting their house who has been vaccinated. So it's a difficult, complex problem.
It is indeed, but I still think that we should rely on the good common sense of the people rather than some remote official. I think the other aspect to this as well that we perhaps will discuss is the reasoning for lockdown initially was to protect the NHS. That was, I remember Boris coming on telly, we all do, you must stay at home to stop the NHS being overwhelmed. Well, the NHS was never overwhelmed. And the Nightingale hospitals on the whole stood empty, or very little of them were actually used. The NHS is not being overwhelmed now. And when we went into Iraq, we were told it was to stop weapons of mass destruction, Afghanistan rather. Then it was to erase the poppy trade. Then it was to emancipate women, because the original reason didn't stand up. And we're seeing the same now. It was to protect the NHS. Well, we've done that. Now it's to protect the vulnerable. Well, we did that anyway. Now we've all got to get vaccinated. Well, that's happening. They need to stop coming up with extra reasons, because I could quite easily see a situation where, a year down the line, in order to reduce our carbon emissions, do we need to have restricted travel arrangements? Do we need to have potentially smaller lockdowns? If we were ever to go down the route of electing a party that was not honourable and not democratic, could that tool be used? One thing that sinister forces may have learned throughout this lockdown is the old adage, all you've got to do is make people frightened and you can get them to do pretty much whatever you want.
And that's exactly what the government has done. And they've done it extremely well, without a doubt. I'm conscious of the time. I know you've got another meeting.
Oh, sorry, yes.
so I'm just looking down the list of the things that you said we would discuss. I think briefly Labour's response to COVID, because it does strike me as if the Labour Party, well, they're not acting as an opposition, are they? I mean, the opposition is coming from Conservative backbenchers. It's not coming from the official opposition.
On the question of the lockdown, the opposition is, as you say, coming from I think it's the Conservative COVID Recovery Group. There have been one or two honourable exceptions on the Labour side. People like Emma Llewellyn-Buck from South Shields, Graham Stringer, good old Graham, has opposed the measures. And I actually think a growing number of Labour MPs, certainly privately, are becoming increasingly concerned about the situation in their constituencies, as I said, in relation to employment, in relation to local businesses going bust. Big issue is the absence of support for self-employed people. And in the cities, there are a lot of small self-employed people in tech, in the creative industries, etc., who are really struggling right now. And so I think, a bit like the referendum, the Labour side it took a while for them to warm up. And now with this lockdown issue as well, I think it's starting to become aware of the problems. And we know if there are tax cuts and if there are going to be spending cuts as well, tax rises and spending cuts, the Labour Party can't then oppose the measures we need to get ourselves back on the straight and narrow when you've been calling for restrictions and in many cases even tougher restrictions, all the while that's caused the position we're in. So Labour's going to have to tread a very careful line here.
Yeah, I mean, Captain Hindsight, as he's known, the leader of the Labour Party. I mean, I don't think that's an unfair sort of nickname to give him, really, is it? He's
our great leader, Andrew. He's going to be Prime Minister.
I think he's probably going to be about as successful as Neil Kinnock, to be honest. But we'll see.
We shall see. I'm not going to be drawn on that.
I mean, you also said you want to discuss sort of Labour and patriotism. That has certainly improved in the past year under Keir Starmer. It does look a much more traditional, as it always was, a traditional sort of patriotic party. And it's interesting, isn't it? I thought probably this time last year that the Corbynista hold on the Labour Party would continue long after Corbyn, but it hasn't really, has it?
Well, you're quite right. And the reason I wanted to touch on this was because in the past 24 hours, a leaked report has come out from the Labour Party where the pollsters, the researchers and the election gurus have said, Labour's big issue has been that it's not been seen to be a patriotic party. It's been anti all the institutions of our country, the military, the monarchy, etc. And really, we've looked quite shabby. And a report has come out that's basically, there's been many aspects to the report, but the particular extract that was leaked said Labour needs to focus on the flag, on veterans, and looking smart at the cenotaph. Now, some within the left of the Labour Party have been outraged by this. It's nationalism, it's the language of the right, it's xenophobic. Actually, no, it isn't. Clement Attlee wore a uniform. Dennis Healey wore a uniform. Jim Callaghan was in the Navy. The Labour Party, in many ways, has set up many of the great institutions that define and contribute to modern British patriotism. We all love our NHS now, and we all love gallant heroes like Sir Tom, who we spoke about earlier on. And the reason I wanted to discuss this was because for many on the right of politics, it's just a given. It's built into the conservative mindset and instinct that love of country, support of institutions is perfectly normal. Yet on the Labour side of politics, there is a group, and it's quite a sizable group, that regard this as controversial and from another world. And I'm just wanted to say I'm so pleased that Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are moving in this direction, because it should be, if you want to lead your nation, you should love your nation. If you want to be its prime minister and the governing party, you should love the institutions of the country and be proud of its history. And so hopefully we'll see Labour continue to get onto a path that's more moderate and more sensible. And it's just normal, loving your country and being proud of the flag should be a normal thing.
Well, it should be. It certainly is in the United States, which is a nice way of sort of moving onto that particular subject, because there are some similarities, between Jeremy Corbyn and Donald Trump, and some people sort of like look at me as if, no, hold on. I mean, hero worship. I mean, Corbynistas regard Jeremy Corbyn as the Messiah. And those die-hard Trump supporters.
It's actually a very naughty boy. Sorry.
No, also regard him as a sort of Messiah, and he can't do anything wrong, and all the rest of it. And also, there was something. I mean, if Hamas blew up 12 people in a minibus in Tel Aviv, Jeremy Corbyn would say that he condemns all violence. He wouldn't specifically sort of condemn that particular group. And of course, that's exactly what Donald Trump did in Charlottesville in 2017, when you had the sort of KKK, white supremacists there creating trouble. He just then went and said, "I condemn all violence." I thought, blimey, that's exactly what Jeremy Corbyn says. And both Corbyn had a very strong hold of the Labour Party, as we know, had it in his grip, and Donald Trump, despite being out of office now, still has very much a firm grip on the Republican Party. And when you look at sort of US politics, yes, the Democrats are split a little bit. You've got the progressive inverted commas wing, with we'll call it Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, if I pronounced the name right. And then you've got much more moderates like Joe Biden, for example, is much more of a centrist. But the Republican Party, as I see it, is in a complete mess. It's not the party of Reagan at all. And you get people like what's her name, Marjorie Taylor Greene, this woman from 14th Congressional District of Georgia, who seems to, well, if there's a conspiracy theory, she seems to be sort of supporting it and broadcasting it. I mean, those sort of people really shouldn't even be in elected office, but they've managed to get there. So, what is going to happen to America over the next 4 years? I know it's a big question, but I mean,
yes,
it also has enormous problems with joblessness and recovering from that.
It is an extraordinary situation to see what's happened in the United States, because we, again, coming back to history, they were always there. Our sort of little nephew that's doing very well in the United States, and they were and are still, the power in the world. One thing we do know, let's just extrapolate it a little bit. We do know that within the next 5 to 8 years, China is going to become the world's largest economy. This is going to have an enormous psychological blow to US prestige, their position in the world, and their influence in the world. And it's going to happen, more than likely, under the presidency of Joe Biden, as I say, within the next 4 to 5 years. American politics is in a unique position in that, as you say, the Republican Party, which was always the party of free markets and business. I mean, they all love the flag and God over there, so it's not unusual, but it no longer is that international free trading party. It has become a sort of old protectionist party, which is very peculiar, because you've then got, this authoritarian regime in China replacing the American system with its own version of authoritarian capitalism across the world. And the Republicans really are in a difficult place. And if they are to recover, they're going to have to somehow rid themselves of Trump, because we know there's rumors of a third party. I personally don't think that will happen. I think it will just continue to Trump will continue to occupy the Republican Party. Now, I don't want to in any way compare her to Trump, because she isn't. But in the same way that Thatcher occupied the Conservative Party for so long, and still does to an extent, I think we could see a similar thing here, in that Trump will occupy the Republican Party even after he's, God forbid, long gone and buried, because he's had such a powerful influence over the membership, over the organisation, the elected officials. It's very hard to shake it off. And where they've been so loyal to him for such a short period of time, but that loyalty has been so intense, you can't then just shake it off. It lasts. The question is, of course, is whether the Democrats can ride out the difficulties that they're going to have to deal with over the next 4 years. I mean, anything can happen in politics. But quite clearly, America is going to face some very, very difficult times in terms of their economy. We look at our situation over here and go, oh my God, we're borrowing hundreds of billions of pounds. Well, they're borrowing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars because their economy is so much larger than ours. That's not really giving you an answer to the question, but it just really, I think, outlines some of these challenges they're going to have. What's going to happen, particularly in those, because obviously Biden's rejoined all the organizations that Trump left. He's probably going to rejoin NAFTA. What's that going to do to all those jobs? Through the protectionist measures Trump introduced, it did start to revitalize certain industries. What's that going to do to those communities, and what politics is going to come out of that? You know, they've been started to be lifted up by the policies Trump brought in and then dropped again. Is that sort of fever for Trump going to intensify in its potency? I think that could happen. And there's certainly going to be a continuation of the extremes, I think, on the Republican side for some time. And that's not good for us.
Well, no, but I mean, it could be extremes on the Republican side, but also extremes on the Democrat side as well.
Yes.
I mean, there's some very, very left-wing members of Congress. So I think those extremes are going to be there. I mean, I was asked a question last week when I was doing another podcast. What caused all of this? What caused the rise of Trump and things like that? Well, Trump just caught the wave at exactly the right time. But I did this going back probably about 20 years. When Bill Clinton left office and George W. Bush came in, and you have obviously 9/11 and things like that. But there was a slow decline in living standards in those traditional sort of like those Rust Belt as they call those traditional Democrat states. And of course, by the time George W. Bush left office and Barack Obama came into office, we were there right the world economy had crashed, and it's never really recovered since then. And there's a general feeling, just like we have here, you know, that all MPs have the snouts in the trough, they're all in it for the wrong reasons. And there's that general feeling in many parts of America that that's what politicians are like in Washington, D.C. I mean, you put all of that into the mix, and then along comes Trump, who makes lots of promises, and many of them he didn't come through, but he did come through with a major tax cut. I'll give him his credit on that one. I think his policy on China was absolutely right, and Biden is continuing that. And that is the reason why all this has happened. And I suppose it culminated. Well, the election wasn't stolen. I mean, even a Republican pollster has come up with all the reasons why Trump did lose. But then you look at what happened in Capitol Hill on the 6th of January, and you just wonder what's gone so badly wrong. I mean, tens of millions of Americans still feel that Joe Biden is not a legitimate president. Now that's going to be really, really hard for him. He's got the Senate now. It's 50-50, but with Kamala Harris's casting votes, the Democrats have the Senate. They've got the House, but they did lose quite a number of seats, more seats than was predicted in the House of Representatives. So I reckon Joe Biden has got 2 years, because in the midterms, I can see the Republicans, if they play the cards right, retaking the Senate, and it's certainly possible that they could retake the House. And if that happens, then it's a completely different ballgame, isn't it? Most of Biden's stuff will not be able to get through. So I think Joe Biden has 2 years, and if he doesn't get this through, and we also know what the American system's like. After the midterms, basically the incumbent president after their first term is they're just back into election. I mean, we know what it's like. And you talk about the big numbers then. Of course, very big numbers. I mean, $1.9 trillion Joe Biden's trying to get through. I read yesterday that it's probably most likely to be trimmed down to about a mere 1.2 or 1.3 trillion dollars. but we are talking about massive amount of money, and it really is a big roll of the dice, because if this doesn't work, the American economy is going to be in serious trouble. Really, really. So I think it's in serious trouble now, but it will be even worse. And we know that when the US economy is spiraling, the world economy spirals.
You're absolutely right. And just coming back to your point, I think on the fact that millions of Americans do not believe that Joe Biden is the legitimate president. The numbers in that election are quite stark as well. I think Trump secured the highest level of vote for a Republican nominee. And I'd estimate a good third, 2/3 of those don't believe Biden is the legitimate president. And for the past 4 years, similarly on the Democratic side, they all believe that Trump rigged the election, and China and Russia and all these people were winning it. And it's quite interesting because their system has held up pretty well since they broke away, and it's put them to a position where being the foremost power in the world. But are we seeing Americans starting to stop believing in their own system? Are we seeing American confidence in their own institutions, in their own democracy waning? Are we seeing Americans starting to question their role in the world? And when you look back through history, most civilizations and powers have started to decline when their people start doing that. When their people stop believing in their institutions, in their leaders, and in their people, as civilization declines. So America really is at a tipping point right now. I know that's an old cliche, but they are. Half the nation, you can't have a situation where half the nation believe you've got an illegitimate government. And as you say, Joe Biden's roll of the dice with this spending package that he's announcing, combined with the rise of China that will soon overtake the US, that position in America is really, really quite unstable. And while Trump has gone, I think we will see more Trumps or more Trumpian style figures emerging to deal with or respond to rather American concerns and passions. And over here as well, I know people compare Brexit to Trump, it wasn't the same. But our country as well is in quite a difficult position at the moment. You've got issues in Scotland, the questions of Northern Ireland, our economy as well. So there are parallels, and we need, I think now more than ever, sensible, moderate people on both left and right to try and come together to re-establish those norms that have been battered over the past few years and try and keep the West ahead of the East. Because globally, to be in a position where an authoritarian communist dictatorship is the preeminent power in the world is not settling for us. If America does go into decline, China's influence grows, Russia's influence grows, and that won't be good for anybody. So we need America to sort itself out.
Yes. One of the speeches before Joe Biden was inaugurated, a speaker had quoted something that I think it was Ronald Reagan had said, that inaugurations are commonplace and a miracle. Commonplace because we've been doing this every 4 years since 1789, and a miracle because we've been doing this every 4 years since 1789. And I thought that was a typical Reagan quote as well, I think. And I think despite everything that's happened since the election and everything being disputed and the sort of insurrection on Capitol Hill, I think the American Constitution has pretty well held. The system has held up pretty well as a stress test, and it went under some stress, didn't it?
Just a bit, yeah.
Right, I'm conscious of the time here, and it wouldn't. We couldn't have a conversation at all if we didn't mention Brexit, and of course the chaos. The chaos since the 1st of January. I mean, what chaos?
Well, Andrew, I mean, as you know, I'm down here in Kent, and it's quite funny. When the ports, we obviously had the issues just before Christmas when the French stopped their own lorry drivers returning home for Christmas because they didn't all have positive tests. That was the only chaos that we had. And that wasn't because of Brexit, it was because of an arbitrary decision by the French government. But I mean, I live literally 5 minutes from the M20 motorway. It's just up the top there, flowing fine. The lorry depot, the big Kent lorry park, is literally 5 minutes from me as well, flowing fine. Yeah, but chaos? What chaos? There's still food in the supermarkets. The sky is still up there. I can see it. The country hasn't gone mad. The only chaos, not chaos, but the only issues that there are between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That is something that concerns me, because I was opposed to the Northern Ireland Protocol when it came out.
I was.
As you were. I think it's totally unacceptable that we've essentially given, sort of semi-control of part of our country to the European Union. And we're seeing now Holyhead, Liverpool and Belfast, huge problems in goods going from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. Businesses are stopped, and you see it every time on social media. There's almost 2 or 3 a day, businesses tweeting out on social media that they're stopping selling to Northern Ireland because of the difficulties that they're having with customs. Boris needs to sort this out, and he needs to sort it out now. Because for the first time in a long time, Sinn Féin are in the lead in the opinion polls in Northern Ireland. We've got separatist issues in Scotland, which are long-standing. We cannot let this country break up. And whatever it takes, we have to do it to keep it together. And I think, as well as the employment crisis we're going to have to deal with over the next few years, I think the constitutional situation here in the United Kingdom is going to really become a hot issue. And I hope the Labour Party becomes emphatically pro-unionist. No doubt about it, we should completely support keeping the country together. I want the Labour Party to organise in Northern Ireland. At the moment, we don't. We need to do that. I think the Conservatives already do organise in.
They do, but they don't really get anywhere.
No, but they should do it.
And that's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So big issues, and we can't. We've already got the Dublin government intruding by saying we will pay for the Erasmus scheme for all your students in Northern Ireland, and you can still access that. The British government should really be stepping in and saying, you know what, if our students want to go into that scheme, that's fine, they can, but they can also go in the Turing scheme that we've set up too. But I'm very concerned because the settlement at the moment that we have from Northern Ireland, over the course of the next few years, there will be a natural orientation towards the south. Because it's still under the influence of the EU's customs system, the lobbyists will look to Dublin. The elected officials in Belfast will look to Dublin. And that cultural and psychological change, are no longer looking to Westminster, but you're looking down to Dublin, could see Northern Ireland leave the Union over the course of time. That would be a disaster.
I agree with every word that you're saying there, and it greatly concerns me. And of course, the actions of last Friday, wasn't it, of the EU?
Oh.
They said we're not going to put a physical border in Northern Ireland. It took them 29 days to threaten it, and then
Yes.
and then after
I nearly did it.
I nearly did it. And after universal condemnation, pretty much. It was blasted by London, from Belfast, by Arlene Foster. It was the Irish government were I think the word is livid, to be perfectly honest, because there was no consultation whatsoever. And I think also the EU probably knew that the Taoiseach could pick up the phone to Joe Biden, who has a little interest in
Small
politics
interest.
of Ireland. Yeah, just for interest. And he probably would have intervened as well. And just the way that they behaved, which I think is good for our point of view, because I've always said that the EU is basically a bullying protection racket. And I think so many people who were Remainers have thought, blimey, I think he's onto something here. He's and the whole cock-up of the viruses, because the EU had to be seen to be doing it themselves, and 3 months late, in getting their orders in, and things like that. But just briefly, so I agree totally with Northern Ireland. It actually worries me. I could see that breaking away. But you've touched upon Scotland. I don't really want to go into the politics of Scotland, as in Labour, SNP, or anything like that. But how likely do you think another referendum is in, say, the next 2 to 3 years? And what do you think the outcome of that referendum will be?
I think there will be a referendum. I'm almost certain of that. Whether it will be a legitimate one or just the SNP holding an ad hoc one to say, we can do it. As someone that campaigned for a referendum on the EU, and if the Scottish people vote for it in May, I would not be able to sit here as a Democrat and say, well, you can't have one. I think if the people vote for it, they should have one. So I can see that happening. I don't think Boris will be able to hold out against it with any dignity. I think it will just become a running sore. So it will happen. Will Scotland leave the Union is the next question. At the moment, I would say 50-50 they could. We have got an enormous job to do in keeping Scotland here. And we know from the referendum, telling them all it's going to be hell and you won't be able to afford anything and you'll be starving and no one will do trade, not going to work. We cannot have a negative campaign from our side. We need a positive campaign. The question, we need to be given the positive one. We can't be saying no. The question should be, should Scotland stay in the United Kingdom? Not should it leave, should it stay? We need to be able to say yes to Scotland, yes to Britain. It's got to be positive. We also need, I think, a campaign not of politicians when the referendum does come. I think the only person in Scotland who I want to see front and centre, the only two people I want to see front and centre of any Remain effort or Yes effort is Gordon Brown and Ruth Davidson. They need to lead it from a political point of view. Boris, stay away. Don't go up there. Every time you go up there, they gain support. And I would say, to an extent as well, I don't think Sir Keir Starmer has yet embedded himself in Scottish Labour enough or has really resonated yet enough with the Scottish people. So we need cultural figures, sports, business and celebrities in Scotland making the case with Gordon Brown and Ruth Davidson for keeping them together. Because at the moment, I think it's 50-50 they could go. It will be tighter than last time. If they stay, it will be tighter than last time.
It certainly needs to be a positive campaign, you're right. The old campaign tactics will not work a second time. But to answer my own question, I think that they will vote for independence, and despite a positive campaign. And the reason I think that is because a lot of the traditional unionist people are of the older generation, and they're sort of dying at the moment. And you have a younger generation, an idealistic generation, who says, yeah, of course we should be an independent nation. Of course we can survive. And I think those voices are coming through. And I don't think it'll be by a big margin. It could even be a 52-48 job, eh? We seem to be rather good at that. But I think as it stands now, I think Scotland will vote for independence. Even with a positive campaign, I still think, don't want to be too, don't get me wrong, I'll quite happily go up to Scotland and help them if they think I will be of any help. I might not be. I might, garner more votes for the Nats than I will for the Unionists. I don't know. I will certainly write in favour of the Union, and I very much want the Union to remain. We really is. I think Boris said the most successful union in the history of the world, really, and I think it probably has been. But I fear now that it's just gone on. It's just gone on for too long. It's all right saying it'd be a once in a generation referendum back in 2014, but I never believed that. And you're right when you said a running sore, because that's all it ever ends up. And then Nicola Sturgeon just said, "Oh well, we're having a consultative referendum then." And then if the vote comes out in favour of independence, the government then really, well, look what's happening with Spain and Catalonia. I mean, now I hate to end on a negative note, but I really think that Scotland will at some point go.
I think that then, if that does happen, I sincerely, as I'm sure you do, we hope it doesn't happen. But if that does happen, I think it then brings into question the remaining part of the United Kingdom, what its role in the world is. Because, okay, let's be honest, in terms of the overall GDP of the UK, England is the preeminent nation. But Great Britain will be no more. England, Wales and Northern Ireland will be left, and it's uncertain as to whether Northern Ireland will be with us for much longer. Do we have a right to remain on the Security Council? Do we have the same voting rights in other international institutions? What's our position in the Commonwealth? Where do we stand in terms of, bear in mind all our nuclear bases are up there, what happens with those? It really will bring into question the rest of the United Kingdom's place in the world. And so while we're all at the moment terribly focused on whether Scotland leaves or goes, there's another huge issue here, which is then what happens to us. But let's just try and be positive for a second, Andrew. I know time is against us. Scotland needs to, if it does decide to do this, Scotland's got to bear in mind the following. We are their guarantor at the moment. Not we, the United Kingdom is its guarantor. The United Kingdom spends an enormous amount of money in Scotland in public service. That will go. That we will not be their reserve currency. They'll be on their own. They will be also outside the European Union, and they will need to reapply. They'll have to get their debt levels and spending and borrowing levels in order. They've then got to consider, will Spain allow Scotland, a breakaway nation, to rejoin the EU when the Basque region and the Catalans want independence? The same with Belgium, with Wallonia and Flanders. In Germany, there are small separatist groups in Bavaria. If a nation can break away from its, if a people can break away from their nation, form a new country, and then go back into the European Union, all sorts of Pandora's boxes open across Europe. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big issue Scotland needs to think about.
It is.
And unfortunately, they're not having that discussion at the moment.
No, they're not. But it will all come out in a referendum campaign, I guess. Well, Brendan, it's a pleasure as always. I wish you every success in your new venture, although you seem to be very successful already with over 2,000 new members. And I hope we can chat again soon.
Thank you, Andrew. It's always a pleasure and good to see you.
Good to see you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.